So with that, it's my pleasure to start off by introducing our speaker, Brian Lonsway. Brian Lonsway, actuality, is an architectural designer, technologist, and theorist. His research is centered on the intersections of experience design and design technology, UI and UX, for spaces both analog and digital. Brian has published theoretical work on themed entertainment architecture, critical writing on shopping centers and mega churches, and both theoretical and applied work on immersive media environments and design computing. With Kathleen Brandt, he is a partner in KBL Studio. They focus on the development and design of learning environments and platforms, including ThinkLab, a virtual laboratory to support collaborative learning and decision-making in design. The award-winning Einhorn Next Generation Design Studio, the innovative online journal Public for publicly engaged scholarship, art and design, and the Welcome Region here in Second Life, where we are today, for the Virtual Worlds Education Consortium, Eduverse. So welcome, Brian. I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Val. Impromptu, I just want to give a very large shout out to Val and Ellie and everyone I've worked with here on the VWEC. It's been just an immense pleasure always to have had the opportunity to work with you. It's also very much an honor to be presenting here as part of the Expert Series. I'm excited to be presenting here in the Welcome Center, which, as you heard and some of you may know, I was centrally involved in the design of, along with my partner Kathleen Brandt. The center was the introduction of me to everyone here in the VWEC, and designing with everyone here was really a fantastic opportunity. So as designers, we were excited to see this Welcome Center in a few guises. First, as a specific purpose-built region for the VWEC, of course. Second, more generally, as a creative and inspiring learning environment. And third, as a waypoint in the historical evolution of this so-called metaverse, especially as it pertains to the educational uses of worlds like Second Life. Speaking to an audience in the metaverse should require very little in the way of grounding our interest in and commitments to using these platforms and spaces to conduct our educational work, expand our social engagements, and to simply have fun. But in talking about designing something with the metaverse, also while in the metaverse, I want to share a perspective on design, specifically why a critical and considered approach to design is so important to the successful development of the metaverse itself. My training and expertise is in architectural design, which of course affords only a particular perspective on the design disciplines more broadly. Admittedly, I've steered my academic training and professional work over the past 30 years to directly engage the intersections of architectural design conventions and experiments with the ever-evolving spatial, social, material, and instrumental implications and applications of computing. And yet, I'd be remiss not to acknowledge a bias that sees the world in one way or another revolving around these things we generally understand as buildings. Across all design disciplines, architecture included, there is a central question concerning the future. Every design, whether actualized or left on the drawing board, is effectively a kind of story of the future. Designer Julian Bleecker frames these as future implications of designs, frames these future implications of designs as design fictions. I won't read the entire quote that's up on the screen. He compares them to science fictions, and here on the bottom says that designs represent a corner of some speculative world where things are different from how we might imagine the future to be. They they bring, as he also says, like artifacts brought back from this world in order to be examined or studied. Designs not only tell these stories, but in fact they lay them out for us to experience. Designs frame, structure, and sometimes dictate the ways in which we use them, and by extension, often the ways in which we engage physically, cognitively, sensorially, the environments of those designs. Philosopher Bruno Latour helpfully suggests that designs have agency, an inbuilt capacity to act, and along with us and other things in the world, act in networks that structure our being in the world. It's a beautiful theoretical framework that's attractive to a lot of designers that offers an explanation of why people who design things are driven to do what they do. Noticing a deficiency in the way something works, we explore how to adjust a particular actor network to better achieve our goals. When a design enters the world, in other words, our actor networks shift, potentially reverberating through many aspects of our lives. We really need to reflect for an instant on the user interfaces and furnishings we are now using with our bodies at this very moment, and how they not only configure our bodies, but how they present us with the world of Second Life, and both opportune or constrain our interactions with it in order to see a particular actor network of design objects at play. What are the implications of any of this framework for designing with the metaverse? And engage the question of the metaverse as a designer, but also as an inhabitant of the metaverse. So a designer who's simultaneously outside and inside, and I'll get a little bit to this later. It feels that there are many operative definitions of the metaverse as there are utterances of the word. So to clarify, I'm using the term in a way that's closely affiliated to Neil Stephenson's, sort of what we could call it, original vision, a three-dimensionalized world modeled loosely on our earthly built environments, but we engage sensorially through technological interfaces to our physical body. It certainly includes places like Second Life and VR chat and rest in peace, Altspace, and also games that offer persistence, host multiple players, themselves modeled in concept, if not in style, from the same vision as Neil Stephenson's metaverse. In other words, I argue that these platforms in the metaverse share a common kind of vision of origin. An image of me meeting some students here in Second Life, a common occurrence to most of us. Of course, the social environments of VR chat. There are also platforms like Minecraft or Roblox with their advocacy, their explicit advocacy of design creativity at the very heart of their play. MMOs, massively multiplayer online games like Final Fantasy XIV, chosen here in particular because of its notoriously positive social user base. And even games like Fortnite, where even though they have these short-term game-based interactions, this rests on an enormous cultural engagement that extends well beyond the game. And I should say that all the images I just showed you here, other than VR chat, were of me in class with my students in these various spaces. It's also critical, It's also critical to acknowledge that the metaverse doesn't need to be visualized as analogies to our earthly spaces, like all of these do, or even visualized at all. This, I would argue, is at least as much a function of sightedness bias and the fact that early on in its history, a so-called computer interface includes a visual display, than it is in any way endemic to what the metaverse is or could be. Again, a really clear example of the actor network of design and its impact on us and the way we use or access the metaverse. As I'm talking today about design, I like to frame the current state of this category of applications, all the ones I just showed, are interfaces to the metaverse, if you will, from a perspective of conventional design tools and methods. And in so doing, I want to suggest that one way we might look at the metaverse would be to see it as simultaneously the following. First, as a lived environment. The metaverse is a place that is part of our everyday lives as much as a room in our house or a space of work or play, a place where we replicate, extend, or augment our out-of-metaverse lives. The metaverse is also, again in this framework, a geometry and visual effects modeling and animation application. Seen in this way, these applications, and I include all the ones I showed and all the ones like it, can also provide access to creating within the metaverse. At the same time that they are our interface tools, they represent a convergence of creation and immersion that, honestly, outside of the so-called metaverse, we are at long last beginning to see in mainstream design applications just now, something metaverse applications, I think, prototyped well in advance. The third of these developed ways of framing the metaverse is as one-to-one immersive prototyping simulators. Right? We can, and forgive me, I'm going through a lot of images here, so I want to make sure I get it all timed right. We can readily imagine how the capacity of current metaverse interface applications can provide, I'm sorry, let me start this one over. We can readily imagine how the capacity of current metaverse interface applications to provide rich multisensory simulations can be extended to provide validated simulations. Here, for example, a daylighting simulation. But simulations that can be inhabited. Right? Immersive VR, as many of you may know, has been used for many years for exposure therapy. The market for VR-based training is growing rapidly. The fine line, I would argue, between game and simulation becomes even finer in the metaverse. And back in this slide here, we see me and some of my students exploring scale and materiality for a hypothetical design of a space that was only to be inhabited by sentient robots of various form factors. So here students used avatars and ambient effects, not merely for affect, but for design decision making. And then finally, the fourth of these valences is as a platform. Look at my right slide here. As a platform for scenario-based role-playing. There we go. Here, a celebratory wedding party in Final Fantasy XIV. Seen from this perspective, the metaverse provides us a place to explore and expand identity, or test and or learn from social environmental interactions from alternative points of view. The metaverse greatly facilitates our capacity and ability to roleplay, whether it's personal and individual, social, or conducted for the purpose of learning or study. In fact, safe-to-fail role-playing is a central highlight of the so-called architectural digital twin. A digital twin is a digital model of an architectural environment that's connected via smart technology in real time with its physical corollary. Oops. Life outside the metaverse already has all of these. Right? You know, we live in the physical environment. We have design tools. Sorry, I forgot the speakeasy. Okay. Life outside the metaverse already offers all of these. We live in the physical environment. We have design tools like physical models and drawings to modify these environments. We conduct simulations in it, sometimes even at full scale. And we certainly both formally and informally role play as part of our everyday lives. What I'm suggesting is unique to the metaverse, from a design perspective again, is rooted in our simultaneous internal and external experience with it. As designers, formally or informally, we are at one and the same time designing for the metaverse as external observers, in the metaverse as internal inhabitants, and with the metaverse as a design application and prototyping simulator. This quote up on screen is from Jason Gregory, a longtime developer of video game engines and development tools. He argues that video games, and by extension I include metaverse platforms like Second Life and others, because his definition really has nothing to do with the game or play aspects of video games. He calls these examples of, quote, soft, real-time interactive agent-based computer simulations. A mouthful, but quite provocative, I think, and very helpful for the framework here today. Perhaps primarily the term in here that's really quite specific that I want to build on is the term soft. Soft is key to the kind of simulation currently manifest in the metaverse. In computer science, soft computing, distinct from hard computing, is, quote, tolerant of imprecision, uncertainty, partial truth, and approximations. It is, in other words, what we would say is safe to fail. So the opportunity to simultaneously design for, in, and with the metaverse is an opportunity to argue we don't have outside of the metaverse. While some may treat it as if it were, of course, right? We don't, in actual fact, have the luxury of using the universe or the planet as a safe-to-fail design simulation tool. So where then does this leave the design, at least from an architectural perspective, of the metaverse, and I should say with the metaverse? On one hand, we want to be able to opportune ourselves with the fluidity, mutability, flexibility, and alterity that the metaverse, as a computationally hosted construct of information, offers us. Yet the desire to maintain the identity of the metaverse as a thing also mandates a persistence and familiarity that pulls in the opposite direction. We want to opportune ourselves in the metaverse as a safe-to-fail simulation. At the same time, we value the metaverse as a safe and reliable non-simulation for us to inhabit. Its original conceptualization by Neil Stephenson is a simulacrum of quasi-urban streetscape operating by mandate, if you're familiar with it, at roughly physical human scale, has more or less been maintained in subsequent manifestations. For example, and again, I would say this is an example of familiarity that provides grounding in human spatial experience. The metaverse, of course, can and does exceed this familiarity in many ways, but still rests on this important foundation. Buildings and landscapes may appear to defy gravity, exceed structural capacities of physical materials, include or enclose non-adjacent spatialities, transform on a whim, etc. But they still reference, in typically very explicit ways, the built environments our bodies and minds are habituated to understanding, navigating, and living in. And this is where I argue that a critical design perspective, one that seeks as much to design with the metaverse as in and for it, is essential. And so here I return to Jason Greger's concept of soft, real-time, interactive, agent-based computer simulations, but add to this, in which we live, work, and play. So again, soft, real-time, interactive, agent-based computer simulations in which we live, work, and play. And from here, we can also bring back Bruno Latour's framing of designed objects as actors with agency. Agents in the agent-based computer simulations in which we live, work, and play. Right? In the metaverse, we all, our avatars, these models of furniture, the script that lets me sit on them, the Havoc physics engine Second Life uses, the texture of the cylinder under our feet that makes it look like a rug, the ambient sounds of nature surrounding us, and the animation currently deforming my avatar to give it a more human-like appearance, are all actors in this actor network that is the metaverse. We all, in here, are bits of structured information designed to afford specific actions and interactions, even if through AI these may be unpredictable or self-evolving. We also can't forget that the layers of interface technologies I mentioned before themselves are actors with agency. The input and output devices we users of Second Life employ, and also the immersive headsets and body trackers and haptic devices and other equipment we use to so-called enter the metaverse more corporately. The racks of servers, the electrical network infrastructures, and server farm architectures that enable all this are actors too. These are all designs with agency. So what then does it mean to design with the metaverse? It's to design from this perspective, that a chair with an animation in Second Life is a single actor in a broad network of other actors that includes my avatar, my keyboard, my body, and the Amazon servers the Linden Lab employs to host it all. But to design a chair in Second Life is to contribute to this network, and thus benefits from an understanding of the implications of the design for this network. You may recall earlier that I positioned design artifacts through Julian Bleecker as both stories about and delimiters of the future. The metaverse as simultaneous lived environment, modeling application, and simulator affords us an amazing opportunity to productively engage our futures together. I need to apologize one more time. I seem to have pasted an earlier version that didn't have the final text for the last slides here. So I will no longer have a transcript for the remaining dozen or so slides here. So please forgive me for those of you that were reliant on that. So I turn to this idea of design futuring. There are many ways to look at futuring, and futuring by itself is a scholarly pursuit, commonly used in design in particular, independent of design futuring, but when we fold design into it, one way to look at it is what you see on screen. Taking this well-known Johari window model of communication of known unknowns and unknown unknowns, part of the project of design futuring is to kind of shift what is currently unknown unknown, which is unknown to ourselves and unknown to others, and bring it more into the domain of known knowns, where things are known collectively and commonly. We can't experience unknown unknowns, right, because we don't know that they exist, until we have an opportunity to observe or experience them. But knowing they can exist can prompt us to develop strategies to make such observations and experiences possible. Designing with the metaverse can provide us with informed insights in how we might be able to engage the unknown once it hits us. Another aspect of futuring here is critical, which builds on practice theory. You see here, where people are seen to construct or understood to construct and perform a social world through social practices, right? It's through these routinized practices that we create and continuously recreate our lived-in reality. And applying this notion of practice to futuring, we can investigate how people come together around particular visions of the future. These practices mediate, curate, create, and enact imaginations of possible futures in the same way that they create our lived-in reality, much like we are doing right here in this very talk. So through giving shape to daily life and the meaning of people's actions, practices, etc., allow for the enactment of imaginations about a shared reality and visions for the future. And I see this very much a good explanation of design with the metaverse. What I want to conclude on here are just some ways of getting us to this argument. So if you return to that four-part framing of the metaverse from a design tool perspective, I'm going to break some of those down. I'm going to take for granted the lived-in piece, and I'm doing that in particular for this audience because I think it's fair to say that we all are comfortable understanding how we live in the metaverse. So first, situation and role play. And I want to get us sort of quickly through a series of images from conventional understandings of role play. And again, I imagine a lot of this might be quite familiar to this audience, where we have this kind of structured role play here. So these are some of my students building design scenarios through role play through a structured role-playing game. This one particularly using the framework of Fiasco within an academic context for the design studio project. So role-playing can look like that. It can become more structured, right, through formal role-playing game frameworks and become a social activity. So here we see Dungeons and Dragons in a very social context. We can also engage in role-play through mock-up prototyping, right, where we take on the role as designers in this kind of almost a sort of feels like prototype. What's it like to be moving through space, right? Cardboard cutouts are very common to the design prototyping workflow. We can also take it one step further through something like LARPing, right, where we're role-playing and now we are using physical appurtenances, we are dressing ourselves, we are engaging in activities as a simulation simulation, but more embodied. One step further, historical interpretation, role-playing serving as a historical framing device, a way to literally immerse individuals in an alternative context. And then one step further into the digital, the kind of individual role-playing that begins to build on all of these various inputs in a highly structured environment. Here is me role-playing, I guess, as a scholar in Final Fantasy XIV. With those ideas of role-playing getting us into the metaverse, we can then look at this manifold aspect of the metaverse as a design tool, right, a modeling tool, a simulation platform for real-time immersive simulation, and an immersive prototyper. And so for this, I'm showing images of some recent design work. Here, a full-scale prototype for the very place we are. We are sitting on the deck, which was an early piece in the design here. And you can see this as a preliminary understanding of what it would be like to land in this region. Those of you who've been part of the design process will recognize when the entire region looked like this. And this was a way for Kathleen and I to propose a design that we and all of the users of the region would be able to understand a sense of scale, distance of walking from place to place, how long it would take one, whether one can see something when one lands, what vistas one has from various perspectives within and outside the buildings. Full-scale prototyping, immersive prototyping, in other words. Here we see it much more evolved. These are early versions of the actual builds. You'll recognize this as a much closer version to what we have now. But here with markers for sightlines and pathways, an early design principle of how the spaces would interconnect into a central zone, right? Again, full-scale prototyping, we're able to both use the space as a space of inhabitation and walk on those, but also see this as a kind of a sketch, right, from a full camera view like this. Here we see me with some students discussing simultaneously a scale model and a full-scale prototype. Right? So this is where the line between lived experience and role-playing on one hand, and prototyping and modeling using Second Life as a design tool converge. So you see us looking, and this view is centered on a scale model of a design, but we were in a prototype of part of that design. So you can see the dome there in the model, and the dome to the left with the arrows pointing at it. Here, similarly, discussing the interaction prototype, whereas the previous prototype was a form prototype, here we were looking at movement through space. Those little white kind of little cubes along the side were understanding what it would be like to teleport to different locations throughout the building without an actual interconnecting corridor system. How one would approach an information or help desk, how long it would take to move across the space. Again, working in this immersive prototype framework of designing with the metaverse. Here too, discussing a prototype, in this case, an actual form prototype. This is a sort of feels-like prototype. We were discussing with the students how the volume felt, whether the materials conveyed the sensibilities that they were interested in having conveyed. And then final design outcomes. So I present these here by way of conclusion before I open things up for questions, as ultimately the goal to create the metaverse as lived spaces. So the students here were designing in the metaverse and with the metaverse, but for the studio was having architecture in the physical world, architecture beyond the metaverse, if you will. As a researcher and scholar teaching the studio, I was also interested in these as spaces actually for the metaverse. And students sort of realized it, but didn't necessarily also realize they were designing the spaces for the metaverse, because at the time they were done, we had created this metaverse. We had created new nodes, if you will, in that actor network. And so these are the ultimate outcomes of these design processes for an architectural design studio I taught a year ago. So by way of conclusion, I introduced in the most thumbnail sketch way possible what I hope was a rich framework for design through understanding design with the metaverse, a framework that positioned the agency of us all as actors and agents in the metaverse, but also the metaverse itself as simultaneously a tool and a space for living. And the argument that I hope sits in terms of this idea of designing with the metaverse is how it opportunes a much more kind of engaged and participatory way of understanding how to design for the future, how we might actually use the metaverse as a space in which we might live, but also as a space in which we might understand living outside the metaverse in terms of its future implications, climate crisis, political upheaval, etc. But to engage these tools as part of our lives in the metaverse, rather than as abstract phenomena that we understand in an academic or scholarly context of simulation or research. And it's this that I think affords probably its most important contribution to design. And ultimately what I hope today, I just at least kind of laid the seed for thinking. I also want to say here at the end, I didn't conceive of this title. And with a nod to Ellie, who wrote me on the invitation to this saying, how does design with the metaverse sound? And I said, that sounds fabulous, and took it as a challenge to really understand what that particular framework might mean. And in fact, even prior to this opportunity, this notion of designing with the metaverse was something I wasn't able to really put my finger on. I wasn't able to identify that ultimately, yeah, that's what I'm doing. That's what this is about. And so that I feel is probably my ultimate conclusion. Again, I apologize that some of these pieces here at the end didn't have text, and Val, thank you so much for real timing it here. And I would love to open this up for questions, which is really how I structured this presentation. So I know we're almost at time. I will stop talking and open things up. But I'm really looking forward to provocations or resistances or ways of furthering this argument, which I'm introducing is ultimately quite nascent itself. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your coming here today.
Thank you so much, Brian. I feel like this was fascinating. And I have a quick question. It made me think when you showed the gaming pictures, Fortnite, I did not expect that. It made me think, you know, when we teach kids to build in Minecraft, we're actually teaching them design principles. Am I correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's why I framed things like Minecraft and Roblox as really design advocacy tools. Of course, there's the DIY aspect versus a kind of expertise perspective, right? And so, I think depending on what one's perspective is fiddling around or playing around in a modeling space design, right? Or is it design with a capital D or design with a lowercase d? I mean, there's all sorts of ways of looking at that. But I think absolutely, much like Legos and other creative building tools do so, but differently again, when we watched our own son move through those applications as a child and get to the point, and then as I taught again Minecraft as a design tool, it was interesting to see the impact of being in it, and not just in an immersive, like I make a model in another program and then I put on my VR headset and walk around in it, but rather the kind of real-time design build, right? I'm crafting the space, I'm projecting myself through an avatar into this space, so I'm really designing it for me and my social group, that I'm working with in there. So it's a long answer, but yes, we are introducing and teaching students about creative agency. Whether how we evoke, let's say, principles of design and design decision making is another story, right? But we certainly lay the groundwork. The more we can use these tools to introduce students to the possibilities of design, it becomes much easier to have that conversation later when it's like, oh yeah, right, I've done that, and now I see you're helping me make decisions in that space, right? Whereas trying to teach people design and design decision making at the same time is one of the biggest challenges, because people just design something and like, why'd you do that? And I'm like, I don't know. So I think that is one of the real exciting aspects of being immersed in it.
Yes, indeed. And feel free to ask a question in the local chat or in voice. And I am putting some closing links here about our next session in February on the 10th with Dr. David Hubbard, where we will go inside the brain, the Brodmann brain areas that light up. And I'll also put some links here to our calendar, so you can find our VWEC calendar and website. I'll look at the chat, see if we have any other questions for actuality. And I see Chandra is asking, how would you recommend encouraging interaction among the students when they do small group work in Second Life?
That was an interesting point, and Chandra, I know we've hit on various implications of this question offline as well. Yeah, things that worked well for the students. It was, I would say, for me, coming at it from a design instructor, where these students have incredible tools at their disposal, right? I know, Blender is a very popular tool among the Second Life community. You understand the potentials of Blender as a form modeling tool, as a visual effects production tool. And you pair tools like that with tools of environmental simulation and building cost analysis and material ecology analysis, and they have such rich tools at their disposal, but sort of keeping them to modeling in this platform as a very intentional experiment was, I think, probably the most successful aspect. Have them work together, because those other tools are individual and isolating, right? So if I give an students and say, go model X, right, and you're all working on the same thing, or design something, they'll each go to their laptops and they will design something, and then they will structure a meeting and they will share what they've designed and make. One person will be designated the final modeler, and they will improve the model or remodel or whatever, and then that's the result, right? Whereas by saying, no, you can't use any of those tools, you can only work in Second Life using the Second Life modeling tools, or the Fortnite modeling tools, or the Minecraft modeling tools, was amazing, because they were all learning together and they wanted to actually work in that space at full scale together on the design. I saw very little, even with the asynchronicity of schedules, that they would kind of, one person would pop in and model something and then leave a note for somebody else. They really would constantly jive. So I think a lot of it was actually just kind of enforcing work within these social worlds, right? Same thing in Minecraft. Even though they met outside to design the space in Minecraft, they had filled 2 or 3 whiteboards with strategies for, who was a more expert Minecraft player, so they knew how to mine certain materials to get it in their thing, and who could, basically just, first time in Minecraft and, punch some dirt to be able to make a hole for the foundation. It was amazing to see that collaboration take place when they had to design a space for us to meet. Right? So yeah, Chandra, I think those are things that worked well, honestly, and it, it, it was getting designers in a space of actual real-time immersive design collaboration itself, which is why I'm so excited by these as design tools, and also the kind of the framework again for designing with the metaverse that I introduced earlier. Did they have any problems meeting, communicating, SL, and sharing their works together? Communicating in SL, none of us have any problems with that, of course, right? So, a lot of it was logistics, which is a good point. We standardized on, just very logistically, we standardized on Discord as our always standard meeting platform. So that was our kind of voice chat for whatever we were doing. And students kind of stuck with that primarily to simplify things across even the different applications we were using. But meeting, no. And in fact, we did invent some design tools I didn't talk about here for leaving notes, things we would accept, kind of simple geometries like an arrow, for example, or a hollowed cylinder, things that would connote certain kind of design feedback responses that would be ways of communicating asynchronously when I happen to be in there looking at something and no student was around to leave a note for. I think those were probably the best opportunities. The problems were more logistical. First-time users of most of these platforms and trying to get over those learning curves. Oh yes, do you have any experience with hacker challenges, so to speak, with design for your students? By that, do you mean like people getting together, doing a quick design?
Yes, or maybe over a weekend, or just a competition kind of thing to spur on students.
Yeah, well, in fact, in fact, that model is centuries old in our discipline. When the École des Beaux-Arts became in France the locus of architectural education, so there's this important moment in the history of architectural education in the West, whereby the engineering aspects of architecture were located in the new École de Ponts et Chaussées, or the School of Bridges and Streets, and architecture was put in the École des Beaux-Arts, or the School of Fine Arts. And in that, one of the things that evolved early, in the 19th century, was something called a charrette. A charrette is actually in French the name of a cart that students would use to pile all their drawings on to take to a final presentation. And so you'd load up the charrette and you'd take it to your review. But what a charrette has come to mean is basically a hackathon. So that's very common, where you would say, and in fact, the Minecraft build that I showed earlier, boy, what number slide was that? See if I can dig that back out. That was slide number 6. All right, let me open that back up and I can put it up on screen here. Yeah, that was a charrette. I said to students on, I think, Thursday or maybe Tuesday of a week to say, all right, so, here's the assigned reading. You've had some time to play around in Minecraft. I did very kind of a hand-holding first day to get them used to the interface. And I said, we're going to meet in Minecraft. You don't have to come physically to studio. We're only going to meet in World. And we're going to discuss the reading in Minecraft. But here's a caveat: you have to design a space for us to discuss the reading. And so that was a 2-day design challenge for them to get together and produce this space using this tool. And so, yeah, that kind of charrette model is very common to architecture and used to quite good effect. It also, much like hackathons, brings with it a whole bunch of cultural liabilities, which are the cultures of no sleep and working around those sorts of things as well. So there's also a kind of a much more responsible concern about relying too heavily on that kind of mode of design development for those reasons, right? To say, give 2 days to do this, and they're all, now not sleeping for 2 days. People who already had familiarity with the interfaces, who were comfortable in a role-playing kind of mindset. Avatars for a lot of people are really weird and wonky, and honestly, Second Life, of course, also has the softcore problem, and can be a turnoff to a lot of people as well when they try to get into it and go through the marketplace and forget to put it on general and things like that, right? So I think Second Life in particular was one that fewer students stuck with, although I did recultivate a lot of interest in Minecraft inadvertently among students who had played it in their youth and hadn't touched it since they were 13, and now all of a sudden we're really jumping in again, and again inadvertently made a whole bunch of Final Fantasy XIV lovers out of the studio as well. So some of the platforms students return to, and even students who weren't necessarily gamers returned to or stuck with those. But I think there are enough kind of clumsinesses and that might be social or cultural or technical, kept some students away. Also, not knowing what to do, like this is just part of life, right? It's an easier thing to life and explore. So I think that's something that would take more time. And those of you who have taught full semesters in Second Life I think it would be more experts in how to kind of maintain some recurrence there as well.
Well, I think this was really fascinating, and it really helped us all look at agent and agency and design with the metaverse in a fascinating way. So thank you so much, Brian. Any other questions? And I did put links in the chat. I'm sure you saw the link to fill out a form if you would like to present here at the Metaverse Expert Series. So thank you all for